Carrie Fezza here at As Zodiac Buzz. I'm not in my little studio today with my planets. I'm here in my office because as I was doing some extra research to bring you the outer planets, I came across some kind of disturbing events. Disturbing yet fascinating, and I feel it's worth it to share with you because of how interesting it is, and to add as a precautionary tale. So if you're experiencing any anxiety or depression with the quarantine or with the recent horrific racial events, please, this is not the video for you. Viewer discretion is advised. It's not my nature to predict doom and gloom and fateful incidences, but I truthfully think this is information worth sharing. So looking at the outer planets, we look at them, they are so far from Earth, they affect us more on a decade kind of schedule. So we call it mundane astrology. We look at them as they relate to global events. And whenever one of the outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, or Pluto, switches signs, there's usually significant events surrounding that and the time they spend in those signs. So prior to the last election, actually after the last election in 2018, Uranus, the planet of shocking, unexpected, unpredictable, the maverick of the zodiac, the revolutionary, that planet moved into Taurus. Now, prior to that, you still felt the effects of a very unexpected election, an unaccepted election, revolutionary election that was protested. You felt the effects before it even switched signs. So even as it was knocking on the door and getting close, you still felt its effects. And in 2018, when it moved into Taurus, which is tried and true, slow and low is the tempo, the status quo, Uranus shook all that up. And as it moved into Taurus, it got worse with the Mueller hearings, the impeachments, a total resistance of this presidency. And within the presidency itself, you had a lot of Uranian energy, and still do. The unpredictableness of it and of the president, people coming and going from the administration suddenly and unexpectedly. You never know what's going to happen on a daily basis. That's very Uranian, and it's going to remain in that sign of Taurus until the next election. 2024, 2025. So expect more of the same. That's not going to change. But when we get to the next election, 2024, all three of the outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, switch signs. So very significant events surrounding that time period. And it's worth it to look ahead because we have 4 years to take caution. Uranus will move into the sign of Gemini, which is ruled by Mercury, the mind, the media, social media, communication. Uranus is the higher octave of Mercury, so it should function well in Gemini. However, if we look to history, and this is how we predict the future, is by studying the past, every other Uranus transit into Gemini in the past 3 centuries has led to a war involving the U.S. So Uranus will enter, and when the outer planets move into the next sign, they usually tiptoe back into the sign they're leaving for a couple months and then go in for the duration. Uranus will enter Gemini on July 7th, 2025, and it'll be there to 2033. The last time it was in Gemini was from 1941 to 1949, coinciding with the Second World War. Now, the war started in 1939, but the U.S. didn't enter the conflict till 1941. And fortunately, we wrapped that up before 1949. In the 1800s, Uranus was in Gemini from 1858 to 1865. That's when you had the Civil War. Prior to that, in the 1700s, you guessed it, Uranus was in Gemini from 1774 to 1782, almost exactly coinciding with the American Revolution. And also timing closely with the French Revolution, if you want to look at it in global events. Now, as if that wasn't an omen enough, Uranus going into Gemini and the history that goes with it, we also have Neptune changing signs. Neptune, the great illusionist, the charming, deceptive planet. Neptune also rules chemicals and chemistry. Uranus is alchemy, Neptune's is chemicals. It's moving into the sign of Aries, god of war, ruled by the planet Mars, which rules war. You could literally have chemical warfare. And we're already seeing that with China. Within barely a few months, China shut down the entire globe and decimated the world economy without firing one bullet or launching any nuclear weapons. And nobody saw it coming. So that's an auspicious sign, and Neptune's not even there yet. So Neptune switching signs, moving into Aries, is another omen. And if we look at it historically, it's going to move into Aries on March 30th, 2025, right after the inauguration. And it's going to be there off and on until 2039. It was previously in Aries from 1861 to 1875, again, coinciding with the Civil War. And if you want to go back even further than that, it was in Aries from 1697 to 1710. 1697 marked the end of the 9 Years' War. So that's two indicators of a potential war involving the U.S. Now, the third outer planet, Pluto, which we still consider a planet for astrological purposes, was discovered in 1930. The nuclear weapons program was launched in 1939, and we give Pluto that energy. We all know how the Second World War ended with the annihilation of Japan. And that's what Pluto energy is. It annihilates things and builds out of the ashes like a phoenix. The gentler meaning is transformation, but Pluto is not subtle. Pluto will move into Aquarius. It'll tiptoe in 2023, retrograde back into Capricorn, and then enter into Aquarius for good until 2044. So from 2024 to 2044, Pluto will be in Aquarius, the friendly sign of humanitarianism and social reform, ruled by Uranus. Social upheaval, unpredictability, so you're matching the Pluto energy with the Uranian energy. Those two energies were together in the 60s when Pluto and Uranus traveled together. And what did you have in the 60s? You had a violent reaction to the Vietnam War. You had the civil rights movement, the women's rights movement, all kinds of social upheaval that all eventually led to social reforms and equality and civil rights and the end of the war and the end of the draft. But it was a bumpy road getting there. So those two energies are going to match up again in 2024 around the next election. So if we look at Pluto in Aquarius historically, it was there from 1777 to 1798, again coinciding with the American and French revolutions. So I don't bring you this information to upset you, but I think it's worth noting. We have a very polarized society right now. If we did have another civil war, I don't personally think it would be a race war. I think it would be a war between the socialists, the progressives, and the conservatives. However you want to define the left and the right. If you're not for one side, you're against them. Everything's polarized. There's no middle ground. If we continue on that path, we could see a civil war where one side tries to overtake the other, or maybe it could be subtler than that, where states that are divided by parties like California, north is a lot more conservative and the south is a lot more progressive. Same thing with Florida, where they separate and become two states, or separate from the Union altogether, and it changes the shape of the USA or changes the map. Or a state could leave the Union completely and change it that way. Or we could start out that way and maybe finally unite when we're fighting a bigger conflict like China or Korea, using not guns and ammo, but chemical warfare. That's a little scary. So I think it's worth taking note of now and preparing for in the future. So take it for what it's worth. Don't shoot the messenger. I'm just disseminating the information because I think it's worthwhile. When we continue on with the planets, everything will be friendly and just relaxed. So thank you for tuning in and taking the time. I'm Carrie Feza, as Zodiac Buzz.